Well, welcome to week 4 of our class, The Fear of Man. I hope that you've been keeping up with these on the app or on our YouTube channel. This week we're going to talk about our fear that people are going to reject us. If you've been following along for the first 3 weeks, we talked about what the fear of man is, sort of in general. We talked about the fear of God, and remember we looked at the fear of man often manifests itself in us and sort of bubbles up in us in 3 main ways. Our fear of exposure, which we talked about last week in week 3, fear of rejection, which we're going to talk about this week, and then fear of harm, be it physical, emotional, psychological, or otherwise. These are the 3 main ways often we see the fear of man bubble up in us. What we want to talk about and spend some time this week talking about is this fear of rejection. It is one that is closely tied to the fear of exposure. If you remember, one of the resources we've referred to often throughout this course is the book When People Are Big and God is Small by Ed Welch. He says in that work, closely related to the fear that people will expose us is perhaps the most common reason we are controlled by other people. They can reject us, ridicule, or despise us. They don't invite us to the party. They ignore us. They don't like us. They aren't pleased with us. They withhold acceptance, love, or significance that we want from them, and as a result, we feel worthless. That our fear of being exposed in front of people is often tied to this fear of rejection by people. That if we are exposed, if they really see us for who we really are, they won't love us, they won't care for us, they won't like us, they won't want to be around us, they'll reject us and send us out away from them. This is true often, even in my own heart. I'm often am tempted to try to figure out the way to make myself look best, to put my best foot forward, to make myself look important or respectable, right? Because I want to not just not be exposed in front of people, but I want to be accepted. And this goes back to when we were kids and you're in the lunchroom. You want to sit at the right table with the right people. You've got to be seen with these kids and not with these kids. Right? You want to be in the in crowd. That so much of our adolescence, our childhood is sort of built into this environment, this culture of acceptance, of not being rejected. This manifests itself in all sorts of ways. I want you to even think about at your work. When you don't get asked to do something, when a coworker or a colleague gets tasked with a special project that you think that maybe you should have done, do you begin to ask, well, what happened? Why didn't they ask me? Why did they ask them? What does that say? Do they not like me? Do they not want me? Or maybe when you do get the special project, you do get it assigned to you, you begin to think, well, how are people going to judge my performance? What if I mess this up? What if I don't do it well? If I drop a ball, am I going to be, are they going to fire me? Are they not going to like me? I'm going to be on the outside. We have all of these things churning in our head as we think about, well, what does it mean for people to accept us? We really fear this rejection that is coming. Again, just like with everything we've talked about, none of this is new to humankind. Richard Baxter is a Puritan writing over 350 years ago. He wrote this little work called Directions Against Inordinate Man-Pleasing. Speaking nearly 350 years ago, he writes this book. And he says this is an extended quote there. He says, "Remember what a life of unquietness and continual vexation you choose if you place your peace or your happiness in the goodwill or word of man. For having showed you how impossible a task you undertake it must needs follow that the pursuit of it must be a life of torment. To engage yourself in so great cares, when you are sure to be disappointed, to make your end that which you cannot obtain, to find that you labor in vain and daily meet with displeasure instead of the favor you expected, must needs be a very grievous life. You are like one that dwelleth on the top of a mountain and yet cannot endure the wind to blow upon him, or like him that dwelleth in a wood and yet is afraid of a shaking leaf. You dwell among a world of unsulterated, selfish, contradictory, mutable, unpleasable minds, and yet you cannot endure their displeasure. Are you magistrates? The people will murmur at you, and those that are most incompetent and incapable will be the forwardest to censure you and think that they should govern much better than you. Those that bear the necessary burdens of the common safety and defense will say that you oppress them. And the malefactors that are punished will say you deal unmercifully by them. And those that have a cause never so unjust will say you wrong them if not go on their side. Are you pastors and teachers? You will seem too rough to one and too smooth to another. Yea, rough to the same man, when by reproof or censure you correct his faults, who censureth you as too smooth, and as a friend to sinners when you are to deal in the cause of others. No sermon that you preach is like to be pleasing to all your hearers, nor any of your ministerial works. Are you lawyers? The clients that lost their cause behind your backs will call you unconscionable and say you betrayed them. And those that prevailed will call you covetous and tell how much money you took of them and how little you did for it. So that it is no wonder that among the vulgar your profession is a matter of their reproach. So all of this makes perfect sense to us as Christians. We should be able to easily turn from fearing the opinions of others, their rejection, their lack of acceptance, and walk in the fear of the Lord, right? I love this quote from Baxter. But the Baxter is saying, if you live your life seeking the approval of men, seeking the pleasure of other men, seeking that they will approve of you, that they will take pleasure in you, Baxter says this is a miserable, grievous life. It'll never make them happy. It will never work because in this life, people do reject us. Just like in this life, we find ourselves exposed that in this life, people will reject us. If you live with the fear of rejection, you just have to know it will happen. You will be rejected at times. There will be times in which people look at you and cast you aside. It is going to happen. You cannot avoid it in this life. And the hard thing about this is rejection hurts. It always hurts. I want you to hear me say that as we talk about this fear of rejection and that you will be rejected. I'm not saying that rejection doesn't matter or that rejection shouldn't hurt us as believers or that it's not painful. No, rejection hurts emotionally, psychologically, right? But our purpose as Christians is not first and foremost to avoid pain. Or your goal as a believer is not first and foremost to avoid that which in life brings pain and to seek your own comfort and pleasure. No, our goal as believers is to live for the glory of God above all else, that we may take the gospel to the ends of the earth, that all men may know God and worship Him. Right? That every knee would bow and profess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. That is our goal. Our goal in this life is not to avoid pain. Right? This is where we often get mixed up. If we think that our goal in life is to avoid pain, we will find ourselves going down all sorts of roads as believers that we have no business going down. Your goal in life is not to avoid pain, right? So rejection's real, and it really, really hurts, right? But the Christian recognizes that though the symptoms of suffering are real, right? But that changing symptoms apart from the really addressing the core problem is ultimately vain and damning. So we can't deal with the fear of rejection just by starting with the truth simply that it hurts and trying to avoid that hurt, right? We're just dealing with a symptom. No, we have to deal with why do we fear rejection. We can't ever not deal with rejection. We have to learn how to deal with rejection and understand that we can't be governed by a fear of rejection. So again, I want to remind you what I'm going to walk through today. By the way, I think I've said this in this class before, and I apologize if I've not. I think I said this in the very first week, but I want to do it again now. This class that we're teaching here is built out of a class that was written for Capitol Hill Baptist Church. It was taught there. They have a very similar adult discipleship model as we do. So we've borrowed this material. They make it available. They put it out for churches to borrow, but I always want to try to cite them. And so to say, I'm tweaking this and using some of the base material and making it my own, but this is the base structure of this class came from Capitol Hill Baptist Church. So I want to remind you, and then you'll find whether you're on the app, whether you're watching on YouTube, you can go just below and you can find this PDF of this week's handout. You can print that out and you can follow along with me. So as we talk about this fear of rejection, we fear that people will reject us. How do we want to think about this? One, let's begin to ask, how do we manifest fear that other people will reject us? This fear that we'll be rejected, how does it bubble up in us? Well, right? We fear about our own personality, right? We have concerns of our own personal characteristics, that we fear that we will be rejected, not so much for what we do, but more for who we are. For our personality, our education, our job, socioeconomic position, gender, race, experience, relationships, right? We fear that we'll be rejected because of who we are, right? And so we begin to chase certain things. We want to change who we are, get a different degree, get a different job, look a different way, change our body, change the way we talk. Right? We want to change ourselves so that we'll become acceptable. So it changes, we seek to change our personal characteristics. Second way we manifest this fear of rejection of other people is that we fish for compliments, right? We go fishing for compliments. If you're just honest, All of us are guilty of this at some point, right? All of us, we like to receive compliments. We like to be affirmed. And so all of us at times go fishing for compliments. We say things hoping that people will compliment us, right? This is often sometimes really, really, really subtle, right? We love praise from others, so we're tempted to sometimes appear humble rather than to actually be humble, right? Lou Prilio, in his book Pleasing People, or rather his book People Pleasing, Lou Prilio, that's P-L-O-U, P-R-I-O-L-O, Lou Prilio. Maybe saying that last name wrong. But he wrote a book called People Pleasing, and he talks about the ways in which we sometimes fish for compliments. Sometimes it's by intentionally putting ourselves down in front of other people in hopes that they'll correct us, right? That they'll disagree with us and say, oh, no, that's not true of you. This is true of you. Sometimes we ask for assessments or critique from other people in hopes that that assessment, that critique will result in our praise. Sometimes it's bringing up subjects that we think if we bring up this subject that we'll be praised for it. Or sometimes it's in conversation trying to keep the conversation on that subject and keep it from being changed so that we'll be praised. Sometimes, we're so nasty in the way that we approach other people. Sometimes we'll praise other people, not because we want to praise them and affirm God's image in them, but we'll praise something that we see in other people in hopes that they'll reciprocate and praise us because we see the same thing in ourselves. Proverbs 25:27 says, "It is not good to eat much honey, nor is it glory to search out one's own glory." And it's not good to seek your own glory, but fear of rejection draws us to this fishing for compliments, trying to draw out praise from other people. Third, this manifests itself in us often in perfectionism. That we want everything to be just right. We fear that if we mess up, if we don't do it 100%, that we will be rejected, that we'll feel worse about ourselves, that we want to present an image in which we always have it all together, we always do it right, and so we're driven in that sense to perfectionism. Number 4, we go along with the crowd. Right, that there is a certain peer pressure sometimes when we fear being rejected. In order to not be rejected, we go along with what other people are doing. In this sense, the crowd doesn't have to be that large. I think about one of my favorite podcasts is the podcast Revisionist History by Malcolm Gladwell. 3 or 4 seasons ago, he had a podcast that was essentially about peer pressure, about what the threshold had to be in order for us to change our convictions and to act outside of our norm in order to fit into a group. And when you begin to look at that within human nature, what we find is that for many of us, the threshold is really, really low, and it doesn't even require that many people. Now, sometimes we think when you're being pressured by a crowd, that it's got to be a lot of people going in one direction for you to go that way. But think about a teenager who is 16 and has just gotten his license. And he knows that it's dangerous to drive extremely fast. He knows that it's dangerous to go 100 miles an hour on the highway. How many of his friends does it take to be in the car saying to him, hey, drive faster, let's see how fast this car can go, right? For most 16-year-olds, it only takes a couple of his friends. He doesn't need everybody he knows saying drive 100 miles an hour. He just needs a few people that he cares about what they think saying, hey, you just got your license. Let's see how fast we can get this car. No one's on the highway. There's no cops. Nothing's going to happen. Let's see how fast you can go. Let's see if we can get this thing to 100 miles an hour. Right? That his threshold is very low for what's going to cause him to change his conviction. Right? So for many of us, what the fear of rejection does is it lowers our threshold. That we're so afraid of being rejected that we will easily change our conviction. We will easily change what we do or don't do in order to please those around us. We go along with the crowd. And sometimes the crowd is even just a couple people, maybe even just one people, that we live in fear of people rather than in fear of God, right? That we want to be in the inner circle. Right, that we want to be those that are in the know, and we fear that if we don't follow the crowd that we'll be kicked out. We won't actually get to operate within the inner circle, but instead we'll find ourselves on the out. I want you to think about, we have this desire so much to be in the know, to be in the inner circle, to be accepted. Just think about all the ways in which there are people who've chased that their whole life, that made it, quote unquote, to the inner circle, and yet are forgotten. As we sit here, I challenge you right now to pause this and without looking it up, to name every single president of the United States. Without looking it up, to name every single president of the United States. And if you can't do that, if you get every single one right, don't look it up. Write down every single president of the United States. Now, write down the vice president, their vice president of every single president of the United States. Who was vice president with them? And if you get that, I want you then to move and I want you to write down the major cabinet members for all of those presidents, all those presidents, right? All those administrations. These are people who at one time were in the inner circle, right? The foremost position in the world, right? It's certainly in our country, but I would argue in the world, right? The well-known inner circle people, and yet not that long has passed, and we don't remember them. They're forgotten. And yet, because of this fear of rejection, we often spend so much of our life trying to weasel our way into the inner circle, moving along with the crowd, feeling pride about being in with a certain group of people. But instead of having any real convictions to move us, we move along with them. It's a manifestation of the fear of rejection in us. Number 5, often this fear manifests itself in that we don't share the gospel. So not only do we so much want to be with them, we don't want to be rejected by them, and so we fear that if we share the gospel with people that we'll be rejected. And so I don't share the gospel not because I think they don't need it or not because I don't think that they'll respond well to it, but because I'm afraid that if I share it, it might cause me to be rejected. And so think about the lunacy of this. That somebody who doesn't know the gospel, has not believed the gospel, is rejected by the Lord, that they are under the condemnation of God, that they will see Jesus at the seat of judgment and say, "Depart from me, for I never knew you." And yet, my fear of being rejected in the here and now often keeps me from sharing with them the gospel that would allow them to be accepted by the Father. It's lunacy, it's foolishness, but it happens in us. The fear of man, fear of rejection causes us often to not share the gospel. Number 6, often we don't confront sin. And we either don't confront sin in other people at all, or we do it in different ways, right? Depending on who we're confronting, right? It's often tempting for us to just sort of let it go, right? We might be hesitant to admonish somebody, not because we think that they need to be treated more gently, but because we desire their approval, right? We want their respect. We don't want to make them angry. We don't want to have them not like us. And so we're careful. We're ginger about the way that we approach them. We approach them gingerly, not out of some concern being gracious or being kind, but really more out of fear of how it affects us. It causes us to be passive towards them, right? So this is number 7. Leads into number 7, rather. Number 6 is we don't confront sin. Number 7 is this affects our posture towards people in general. But often this leads towards what we would call passivity towards others, right? We wait for them to initiate, and whether love or reconciliation or leadership or decisions, righteousness, right? That we ignore. It doesn't mean that we ignore social cues and we just should plow forward any way that we want. But it also means that we ought to appropriately take the initiative in reconciling with somebody, in leading, in decisions, in righteousness, and caring for other people. But there are often times in which we refrain from doing that and refrain from doing the right thing, that what we know to be right, because of the fear of rejection. Right? This often happens in churches. Right? That so much of what happens in churches, the posture of so many churches towards people, is that of we just want to be accepted by you. That what we're going to do and the programs we're going to offer and the money we're going to spend and everything that we're going to do, it's all going to be geared towards making people happy. It's all going to be geared towards being approved by people, not on what we think is right, not on what we should do, not on what the Bible calls us to do, not about what people need, but rather on what makes them happy. And so they play this game of trying to appease everyone, trying to make everybody happy. And I say they play this game because it is a game, and no one wins. When you play the game of trying to make everybody happy, you lose. Everybody loses. It's an impossible game. This is the Baxter quote, where you'll never be able to do it. But the fear of rejection often shades our entire perception of everyone, right? Not just individually, but often this happens at a church level. And then number 8, it manifests itself in our speech, right? That many types of speech that we engaged in demonstrate for us a fear of rejection, right? Gossip, saying behind someone's back what you would never say to his face. Or the equally evil, but a little more subtle twin of gossip, flattery, right? If gossip is saying behind someone's back what you would never say to their face, flattery is saying to someone's face what you would never say behind their back. lying, blame shifting, self-justifying language, manipulation, changing the subject or conversation, or keeping it on a topic. These are all ways that the fear of rejection begins to manipulate and change our language, this desire for acceptance and this avoidance of rejection. So when you think about it, I want you to even just think now, how do you see the fear of rejection playing out in our culture and maybe in your own life? What does this look like? You may even just take a moment there and on the side of your paper write that down. Well, let's move on. Third, let's talk about how fearing rejection and craving approval harms us. What does it actually do to us? When we live this way, we live with this fear of rejection and we allow it to govern our lives. How does this harm us? I want to give you quickly 7 ways in which it harms us. Number 1, it enslaves us to others. Proolo, the guy who wrote Pleasing People, right? Lou, we'll just call him Lou. His first name's Lou. Let's just do that. Number 1, it enslaves us to others. Lou, in his book, People Pleaser, says that being a people pleaser is like having a little handle on your back that others can grab onto and grab hold of to push you and to pull you in all directions, right? That it enslaves us, that people are able to manipulate us, to move us, to get us to do what they want because there's a handle on our back because we want to please them and they can move us. Number 2, love for praise actually undermines our receiving it. That Lou again says in his book, those from whom you long to receive honor and those whom you desire to impress will eventually be offended, if not repulsed, by the pride that generates your lust. Did you catch that? Those from whom you long to receive honor and those whom you desire to impress will eventually be offended, if not repulsed, by the pride that generates your lust. What he says is you're going to so want their praises that you are ultimately, by the desire, by the lust, the craving of their praises, you're going to repulse those that you would want to receive their praises. So love of praise actually undermines our receiving it. Number 3, heavenly rewards are lost. Right? That our job, our goal in life is not to receive the praise of men, but instead to receive the praise of the Lord. Right? When Jesus is teaching his disciples to pray, what does he say about those Pharisees who pray long prayers in the streets that they might impress men? What does he say? I tell you, truly, truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in what? In full. The reward for the believer is not what men say to us, is not how men approve of us, but instead how God approves of us. Number 4, this love of approval, this fear of rejection, causes us to be increasingly blind to our own sins. That our compass becomes not the Holy Spirit and not what honors the Lord and not what's right and wrong, but instead what garnishes approval or what causes us to be rejected. Number 5, this fear of rejection makes us more susceptible to being ensnared by flattery and deceit. It makes us easily manipulated. We can easily be flattered. We so crave praise. We so crave approval that when people offer it even falsely, we're easily deceived. We gobble it up, right? We hoard it. And so we are easily manipulated. We are more susceptible to flattery and deceit. Number 6, it causes us to be more susceptible to other sins, which is not surprising when we demote God from the place of utmost fear and trust in our hearts. What are some of the sins that flow out of fear of rejection? We looked at some of those earlier. Hypocrisy, discontentment, greed, timidity, unteachability, indecisiveness, right? Indecision. All these things take an effect on us. Number 7, it can take a physical and psychological toll, right? We are, I've talked about this in other classes as well, we're embodied people, right? We have bodies, and so it's hard to draw a really clean line between soul and mind and body, and so often what's happening in our body affects our mind and our soul and vice versa, and when we live this way with fear of other people, it can take a physical toll, right? A psychological toll, often manifesting in anxiety, stomach problems, right? Stress, tension, headaches, fatigue, depression, mood shifts, right? The fear of man, this fear of other people, this fear of rejection has a way then of controlling this, right? So this is how fear of rejection and craving approval harms us. Let's talk about now how pride fuels our fear of rejection, right? I'm going to go through these quickly. But if the fear of man is the fire that rages within our heart, then pride is the wood and oxygen that fuels that blaze. How does pride fuel the fear of man? How does it provide the foundation for fearing man? Right? 6 ways I'm going to give you. Ways that pride fuels our temptation to fear man. Number 1, it can cause us to distort our sins and faults, either maximizing or minimizing. Right? It doesn't allow us to have a clear view of who we are and our sins, our faults, and our struggles. Sometimes we maximize them. Sometimes it causes us to see them as bigger deals than what they are. And sometimes it causes us to minimize them and to see them as less than what they are. Right? It distorts our view of our own life, of our own sin. Number 2, it will tempt us to elicit praise from others. Right? Our pride causes us to want to have other people agree with us that we think we're so great. Right? The pride elicits praise from others. Number 3, it can cause us to misapply the praise that we receive, right? Look at how great I am. They said this about me, that the praise that we do receive, we misapply it rather than understanding that when we receive praise from people, if it's right praise, it's God-honoring praise, it's praise that we turn back to God, that we are who we are in all of our good ways because of the work of the Spirit in us, that we can be thankful for the work of God in us and receive that praise, but pride causes us to fear the rejection of other people and causes us to misapply that praise and to puff ourselves up. Number 4, pride in the relationship to the fear of man will tempt us to overvalue our strengths and to minimize our weaknesses or our sins. To think that our strengths are stronger than they are and our weaknesses are not as weak as they are. Pride in relation to the fear of man will tempt us to change our behaviors, not seek a changed heart. That sometimes this fear of rejection will cause us to make good behavioral changes. Changes that are good on the outside, changing our behavior from unacceptable to acceptable, changing from wrong to right. But sometimes we make that decision, we make that change, that shift, not because of conviction of the Holy Spirit, not because we have a heart change, but because we want merely the outward change, not for the sake of honoring God, but for the sake of being approved by people, not being rejected by man. Number 6, last one, pride in the relationship with fear of man will tempt us to dismiss confrontation over sin or weakness, right? It just must be their opinion. That's what they think. They don't know if they really knew me, right? That pride can't handle criticism. It can't handle accountability. It can't handle correction. And so pride causes us to push people out and not allow them to come to us about our sin. So I want you to think about your own life. What are the other ways you see pride fueling the fear of man, this fear of rejection in your life? That often what we find is that, just like that quote said, that if the fear of man is the blaze, the fire that rages in our heart, that pride often is the wood and the oxygen that fuels that blaze. How do you see that? How do you know that to be true in your own life? You may be thinking now as we've gone through this. So you might be saying, well, Chris, are you saying that we ought to never seek to please other people? Right? That I should just live my whole life just not caring what anybody thinks, and I should never seek to please other people. No, that's not the case. So we have to ask ourselves, is it ever appropriate to seek to please other people? Lou, in his book, People Pleasers, answers that question. I would recommend the book to you. I've not read all of it. I've read pieces to it, but he goes through this. So let me go through a few ways in which, at least a few ways, in which it's appropriate to seek to please other people, right? That a desire for honor that is not greater than our love of God or our love for others or our desire to obey Him is an okay desire. Right, Proverbs 15:33, right? Scripture that doesn't say, scripture that says that receiving honor and esteem and approval isn't wrong, right? In fact, that receiving honor and approval and praise often can be a very good thing, right? It often, what the Bible says, it accompanies a righteous life. It just in the same way that fear of exposure and fear of rejection comes with foolish living, often praise comes with righteous living. Not always, but often. So a few ways in which it is appropriate and even incumbent on us to seek the good of others, to seek the approval of others, to seek to please others. Number 1, as much as is needed for our gospel ministry and proclamation, we should seek to please other people. Right? As much as gospel ministry and proclamation requires it, right? That we're to live at peace with all people. We're to seek a good reputation with the outsiders. And this is what Paul says about pastors, right? We're to be tempered with a realization that our desire to have live at peace rather with every man is for God's glory and praise, not our own. And ultimately, we're not finding our identity or our value in this type of approval, but instead we're seeking to build bridges, to open up doors that we might share the gospel. Paul says, 1 Corinthians 9, that he becomes all things to all men that he might by there win some. And Paul recognizes that in matters that aren't sin, It's appropriate to adapt oneself to one's audience in a way that will most appropriately adorn the gospel. So what this means is that maybe your neighbor's an unbeliever, right? And your neighbor likes soccer, and you don't like soccer. But you want to have a relationship with them. You want to build a bridge. You want to begin to share the gospel with them, to deepen your friendship with them. Maybe you start watching soccer. Maybe they say, hey, I'm watching the big soccer game match thing. Well, I don't know what they call it in soccer. I'm watching the soccer square. I'm watching the big soccer square where they're going to move this Saturday at 4, and your neighbor says, hey, I'd love for you to come over, right? It's not a bad thing for you to say, yeah, I'd love to come watch it with you. I'd love to learn more about soccer. I don't watch it a lot, but I would love to come watch it with you, right? That you're seeking to be interested in something that they're interested in, right? That you might open a door for friendship and relationship. That's not what we're saying here. That's not a bad thing. That's an honorable thing, right? In order to please those around you for the sake of, in areas where it's not sin, for the sake of gospel ministry. Second is in relation to pleasing and respecting parents and authority. Right? It's not only appropriate to seek to please parents and authorities, but it's commanded. Right? This is within the context of not pleasing these individuals above and beyond fearing and trusting God. Right? So ultimately we fear and trust God, and where pleasing and obeying authorities, like parents and other authorities over us, like bosses, is not sin. It does not contradict fearing God. It's not a bad thing. In fact, it's a good thing for us to seek to please them, right? You think about Exodus 20, Proverbs 16, Titus 2, all these texts talk about this. So think about, for example, in regards to your boss, right? There's nothing sinful about taking a certain action at work or completing a task in a certain way because you know that doing it that way pleases your boss. As long as what you're doing is not a sin, does not violate love of God or love of neighbor, right? It's not a bad thing to say, this is my boss. I know that it would please them to do it this way. And to do it that way in order to please them, right, it would be sinful, actually. If you know it's what your boss would approve of, if you know this is what would please my boss, and you choose to do another way, it would be sinful. So it's another instance in which it's not wrong to please other people in respect to parents or authorities. Number 3, if you're married, it's not wrong to seek to please your spouse. And in fact, it's incumbent on you, if you're married or if you're going to be married, that this marriage relationship that you're in succeeds all others, right? Supersedes all others, right? That you are now, as a married person, you're responsible to please your spouse. Not to please your parents, right? Not to please their parents, not to please your extended family, but to please your spouse, right? The desire for one's approval from their parents often causes untold damage in marriages, that rather than please their wife, or rather than to please their husband, spouses often seek to please their families, to please their parents, to please their extended family, rather than caring about the pleasure of their own spouse, right? That's your main priority. So it's not a bad thing to seek to please your spouse. Regarding this nature, Lou, again in his book, People Pleaser, says the Greek word used in verse 33. Referring to 1 Corinthians 7, 32 through 34. Lou writes, the Greek word used in verse 33, which is translated to please, is a word that has several nuances of meaning. Its root means to fit in with. It can also mean to conform, to adapt, to satisfy, to soften one's heart to meet with one's approval, to accommodate. The word implies a pre-existing relationship between the one doing the pleasing and the one being pleased. While an unmarried Christian should have his mind focused almost exclusively on how he may please the Lord, the attention of a married Christian must focus not only on pleasing the Lord, but also, at the same time, pleasing his spouse. The Bible assumes that all married persons will have their interests divided between pleasing Christ, which is always top priority, and pleasing their spouse, right? That part of what you do as a believer, if you're married, is to seek to please your spouse. Again, not over and against pleasing the Lord, and not in ways that would cause you to sin against the Lord, but to work for the approval of your spouse, to work to please them. And then lastly, this sort of fourth one, is that it's right to deny yourself for the sake of not offending, right? This is Romans 15, this is 1 Corinthians 10, right? That there are times in our life in which we lay aside our liberties for the sake of a weaker brother, in which we seek to not so much win their approval, but we seek to care about their preferences, and often care about what Paul talks about, their conscience more than our own liberty. So there are times in which we deny our liberties, we lay our liberties down that we might not offend, that we might care well for those that are around us, right? So that there are times that you might be asked to do something. I don't know, wear a mask, maybe. I don't know, just hypothetical here. You might be asked to do something that you don't want to do and that you don't really like and that maybe you don't even see a need for. Maybe your own conscience is clear and you don't have any need to wear one. You don't think you have a need to wear one. But you know what I think Paul would say? That for the sake of the weaker brother, that at the very least, that you would wear a mask. Again, hypothetical. No one's asking you to do that. Wink, wink. Right? At the very least, that you would wear a mask, not for your sake, not for your conscience sake, but for the sake of other people, as a way to show love, as a way to show care. Now, if you're doing that, you might be accused of living for the approval of men. You're just doing that so that you can be a government slave. You're just doing that so that other people will think well of you, so that you won't be shamed for not wearing one. No, maybe some of us are wearing masks, not because we are a slave to the government, not because we so crave the approval of other people. Maybe some of us are wearing masks, one, because we care about other people. And that even if we're not personally scared of whatever may come to us from not wearing a mask, that this is a way in which we show care and love to other people, that we're willing to give up our own liberty, in this instance, in order to show care to not offend others. Right there, it's biblical. Romans 15, 1 Corinthians 10, right? So what argument that Paul says? He tells the Corinthians, right? Some of you are eating meat, sacrificed to idols. And he says sometimes, he tells them there's no problem with that ultimately, because idols are nothing. Eat the meat. If your conscience is clear, eat the meat. But Paul says, if you're causing your brother to stumble, don't eat the meat. There are times in which it's better to lay aside our own liberty, our own preference for the sake of another's conscience. So there are times in which it is appropriate as believers for us to seek to please others, right? So as with all of these we've looked at, again, this is not a new thing, but we see this fear of rejection in the Bible, right? Fear of rejection would fall into the category of idolatry. The fear of rejection is idolatry. It is worshiping the created rather than the Creator. It is caring more about their thoughts of us than what God's thoughts of us, seeking their approval more than seeking the approval of God. Where else do we see it in the Scriptures? Deuteronomy 1 verse 17 says, "Do not show partiality in judging. Hear both small and great alike. Do not be afraid of any man, for judgment belongs to God." That Moses recognized the tendency, even in judges and those in authority, to treat people different, to treat people with partiality, with favoritism. 1 Samuel 15:18, that Saul fears David's rise, right? He fears that he's going to be rejected by the people as they're going to switch their allegiances to David rather than to him. And John 12:42 and 43, we read it, "Yet at the same time, many even among the leaders believed in him, but because of the Pharisees, they would not confess their faith for fear that they would be put out of the synagogue. For they loved," listen to this, "they loved praise of men more than praise of God." It's one of the saddest statements in all the Gospels, that many of the Jewish leaders believed that Christ, they at the same time, they believed him. They believed that he was telling the truth, but they refused to confess him. They refused to confess their faith in him because they were more afraid of the Pharisees. And they didn't want to be put out of the synagogue. They loved the praise of men rather than the praise of God. 1 Corinthians 2:15, "The spiritual man makes judgments about all things, but he himself is not subject to any man's judgments." Paul's telling us that a Christian is not subject to the wisdom of this world, to the judgments of this world. That wisdom that would proclaim the gospel to be foolishness. The more we live in this reality, that we are not judged by the world's standards, the less we'll be fearful of losing the world's approval. Galatians 2:1 through 11, or 11 through 12, that when Peter came to Antioch, Paul says, "I opposed him to his face because he was clearly in the wrong. Before certain men came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from Gentiles because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group." That Peter gives in to fear of rejection. He desires the approval of the Judaizers, and so he withdraws himself from the Gentiles that he might be accepted by them. In Exodus 32, Aaron facilitated and encouraged the idolatry of the people by building the golden calf for them, all because he wants to maintain their approval. He engaged with and aided and abetted the idolatry of the people of God right after the Exodus because he loved the praise of men more than the praise of God, because he feared being rejected. In Mark 15:15 we read, "Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. And he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified, in spite of acknowledging that Jesus had done no crime, Pilate preferred to appease the crowds rather than to release the Son of God, and so became the custodian of the greatest mistrial in all of history. He wanted prosperity, he wanted popularity, he wanted peace and approval more than he feared God. Right, that leads us here to our last point in thinking about how we're tempted by the fear of rejection and how we overcome this fear. That just like when we talked about the fear of exposure, there is no shortcut. There's no self-esteem, self-help way to fix fear of rejection. There's no way that I can keep you from being rejected in your life, and there's no way I can keep that rejection from hurting. The overcoming and dealing with the fear of rejection is not about reaching inside and building ourselves up or thinking higher of ourselves or speaking truths about ourselves into the world or speaking positively about ourselves. Right? The problem is in us. The problem is out there in the world, and the problem is in here in me. I cannot reach into myself and find the solution when I myself am the problem. I've got to go outward. Got to find the solution to this only in the person and the work of the Lord Jesus. How do we deal with fear of rejection? We do it by looking to Christ. That Jesus was and is rejected by man. Jesus knows what it means to be rejected. He was rejected. Isaiah 53:3 says, "He was despised and rejected by man, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering, like one from whom men hide their faces. He was despised, and we esteemed him not." This begins to put our fear of rejection into perspective. That Jesus, the innocent one, experienced the most severe form of rejection, crucifixion. He was rejected by man. And then ultimately at the cross, as the Father laid his judgment on God, he was rejected by God so that we would not be rejected by God. And that we would no longer be enslaved to fearing those created by God. We understand that because of this rejection Jesus endured for us, any rejection we are called to face in this life is temporary. Just as the approval that we so often seek and attain is temporary, it is fleeting. So any rejection that we do experience will fade and will ultimately and quickly be forgotten. Have you not seen this to be true in your own life? Can you remember ways that you were fearing? Do you remember the ways in which you feared rejection when you were 10 years old? When you were in third grade, do you remember the ways in which you feared rejection? How the fear was so real, yet are you worried about any of the same things anymore? I'm not worried about, I remember being a kid and thinking my shoes wouldn't be cool enough and I didn't have the right brand and they'd be light up. I remember all the things I cared about. When I was in fifth grade, it was Jinko jeans and all the cool kids had Jinko. I just think about all the ways and all the time in my life that I've worried about being rejected. And then how many of those things seem so silly 30 years, 15 years, 10 years, 10 minutes sometimes later. This fear of rejection is often for us so fleeting. In Ephesians 2, Paul describes that in Christ we are now accepted by God. That you have received in Christ the greatest approval and acceptance that you will ever need. In Hebrews 4:14-6 says that because Jesus was rejected, he is able to sympathize with our rejections. Not only that, but because he is of his high priestly function, we can come to him with our fears and ask with confidence that he replace our insufficient fears of other people with a robust and complete fear of him, that we would not fear man, but that we would fear God. And so you got to begin to ask yourself, what does it look like for you to begin to live with a fear of the Lord rather than a fear of rejection from man? What would it mean for you to begin living in the reality of the one who has accepted you in Christ Jesus, the one who was despised and rejected for you, that you might be redeemed, that you might be loved and accepted by the Father? What would it mean for your life to begin to live in the reality of what Christ has done for you? We spend so much of our life afraid of other people. Afraid that they'll see us and not like us. Afraid that we'll be exposed because we're not who we want to be. We fear that we'll be rejected, we'll be hurt, we'll be cast out. We'll be put on the outside. Excuse me. And yet, that's exactly what happened to Christ. He was crucified outside the camp. He was put outside the camp on our behalf. Rejected of God, suffering under the wrath and the judgment of God that we might not. And so, don't reach down inside yourself. Don't try to puff up your own self-esteem. There's no self-help book that can help with the fear of man, but instead, just like always, we turn our eyes to the Lord. We turn our eyes to Christ. We keep our minds focused on Jesus above all else. And we fear God more than we fear people. We don't seek to run roughshod over people. We don't seek to steamroll them. But we don't live our lives controlled by what they think about us, controlled by their approval or their rejection of us. We live our lives knowing that we are approved and accepted by God, and that is ultimately all that matters. Let every man reject us as long as Christ receives us. That's the life of the Christian. So I want you to take some time this week and begin to ask yourself, in what ways does the fear of man, and maybe specifically, what ways does the fear of rejection begin to dominate your life and control your life? And in what areas do you need to repent of that? In what areas do you need to turn to Christ and to ask for help, ask for mercy, ask for grace from the Holy Spirit, and that you might see God more clearly, that you might live in the fear of the Lord rather than the fear of man. Thank you for joining me this week for week 4, and I hope to see you again back next week for week 5.